You guys prepared the way for people my age.
I hope so.
Well, and I think that's, one of the reasons that we're talking about Women's History Month, right?
Yeah.
And what that is. And to me, that means an intentional time to celebrate the women who came before us, the women that are with us now, and then the women that are going to come after us. And how can we appreciate and give thanks to what's happened before us and then continue that legacy on.
I grew up in a very rural area, and a lot of our time was spent in farming. And like I said, my parents owned their own business, and so I grew up with two parents that were always at work, and when they weren't at work, they were working. So, that's just sort of was imprinted on me of when you talk about hard work, like I've never known anything but laboring in some capacity. I enrolled in a graduate program at night. I had children and had to work during the day, and went to grad school, and then that just really catapulted the career. It's been a good field. I love human resources. It's changed so much and evolved, and but it's a very good field if you love strategies and you kind of like people. Most days. But yeah, it's an interesting profession.
So my story is that I grew up in the furniture industry, the daughter of a case goods exec. They say you have sawdust in your veins, and I definitely had sawdust in my veins. And I spent many a night talking furniture with my dad, and it was a really special time for me, and I have lots of really good memories about it. But interestingly enough, before I became a professional, my dad said to me, "Don't ever get in the furniture industry. It'll break your heart." And this was during a time in which all the furniture manufacturing was going offshore. Mm-hmm. And it kind of broke his heart. He was, he just had a lot of care for especially North Carolina families and other families in the United States who were manufacturing furniture. He hated what was happening. And it really made him sad to see all that manufacturing go. So for a period of time, he really didn't push me to get in the furniture industry. But of course, one thing led to another, and I couldn't stay away from it. And I actually started as a rep in the industry. So I was on the vendor side, and I was selling to retailers and designers in North and South Carolina. And I really grew to love it. And my dad never got to see me be a rep because he passed away right before I started repping. So I hope that he's seeing me now and he's proud of me. But I became a rep, and I did that for several years. And then I actually knew this guy named Jeff Harris, he and I grew up together. And he reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in coming in on the retail side. And I hadn't really thought about it, but one thing led to another, and I said yes. And so 10 years later, here I am. But I think I have a really interesting perspective because I've seen the vendor side and I've seen the retail side. And I think the one thing that I'm really proud that I inherited from my dad is I have really strong emotional ties to this business and how important it is. And just simply the people in North Carolina that make upholstery, hundreds and hundreds of families are profoundly affected in a positive way by what we do at Furnitureland South. That's important to me. And I think about it a lot. I think about this store and how important it is to be successful and how important it is to so many families. So I've definitely got that heartfelt connection, and it's a great source of pride for me. I know you probably feel the same way, and even more so, Sydney. I know your story, which I'd love to hear your story because you're connected to it even more than I.
Yes. Growing up in the furniture industry, people always say you either stumbled into it or you kind of grew up in it, and I definitely was the latter of those. But growing up in the industry, my dad worked here, my uncle was here, my grandparents were here, and our business, when I remember it, we were growing so much. And people ask me all the time, did you know you were going to get right into the furniture industry? And for me, I didn't really have that strong yes or no yet. I think I had to find that over time. I loved coming to work with Dad. I loved working and watching my grandparents work and running around this place literally as a child. So I knew it was always going to be something that I would consider, but it really wasn't until I got kind of away from it for a little bit, going to school in South Carolina, thinking about staying in Charleston, but I'd gone to a women's conference through With It, which is Women in the Home Furnishings Industry Today. And I'd gone to the conference. My dad encouraged me to go. He was sending some other ladies from Furnitureland. And it was really there that I saw the broader glimpse of the industry, and I saw more than just the retail side. I saw women that were on the operations side and on more of the merchandising side and on the rep side and on the manufacturing side, and I really just fell in love with the multifacets of our industry that I'd never really been exposed to, and the fact that there were women in huge leadership roles at their respective companies. And I kind of had my tunnel vision only on retail and how our business sat in the industry as opposed to seeing it as a whole. And I think seeing it in that lens and just how big it was and how much work was being done to bring in the next generation, to empower this next generation of leaders, specifically women leaders, that really sparked my passion to get involved sooner rather than later. And so I came home back to this area, worked in sales here for a year, and then moved into education. So I was doing all of our sales training for new hires, and then now that's kind of broadened into a much bigger role with training and education, and then a few other hats that I wear here.
So you brought up a really good point, and I think I remember, but I had a female college professor that to the end of my life I will remember her, and she was a huge mentor for me. And it was a professor that was a really difficult professor. She was an English professor, and I remember rewriting papers over and over again and feeling like I was unable to please this woman, and working so hard to make sure that I created something that she felt was appropriate and worthy. And I just remember having that feeling of, okay, if I want something really hard in life and I want it to be something that I can be proud of, it's not always pretty.
Yeah.
Rewarding work's not always pretty work. It's hard work. Mm-hmm. And she probably mentored me more than anything, which is kind of ironic.
Do you think she knew that?
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever go back and tell her?
No, I didn't ever see her again, but I meet a lot of graduates of Meredith College, and we all talk about Dr. Rose, because I think she was in her 70s when she was my professor, but she was one of the best teachers I ever had in my life. Yeah. And it was mostly because she kept telling me I was doing it wrong, and I just kept having to work and work and work, and I feel like it instilled in me this sense that rewarding work is hard, and it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to have hard work. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And, you know, mentors can be people who don't even know they're mentoring you.
Mm-hmm. True.
I've had some of those too. People that I just observe in their, you know, as I was coming up in my career, and I tell young people coming into the workforce now, I'm like, you know, people can influence you in two different ways. They influence you positively and you want to emulate that behavior, or they influence you in a way that I absolutely want to make sure my leadership style is not that way.
Both of my grandmothers, definitely. My maternal grandmother, my Mimi, she was a school teacher. So by the time I was coming around, she was fully in grandma mode, but always a hard worker, compassionate, loving to everybody around her. And then my grandmother, Stella, who was the co-founder of our business, I didn't get to watch her in business a lot just because when she passed, I was just getting into college. So I didn't get to work with her, unfortunately. But I loved how steady, and she was a hard worker. She was also a tough negotiator. And when she spoke, it was very powerful. She wasn't an over talker or over communicator. She was just very steady, and you knew that she meant business, and she portrayed that. She was a very classy woman, and very strong with her morals, both of them strong in their faith. So those were definitely my first iterations of role models.
One of the things I wanted to touch on was what you said about your grandmother influencing you in the way that she handled herself, and the way that she spoke, and the way that she had to be a shrewd negotiator. I think that's a big part of women in leadership right now, is understanding how to be a woman, be feminine, but still be able to be a leader and be powerful. And I think it's an ongoing challenge trying to figure that out. I think for men it's so easy, and for women it's a lot harder because you have to sometimes prove yourself, but not too hard. You have to be soft, but not too soft. And it's a different type of a dynamic for women that are professionals than men. And it's something that I consistently have to work on. And it depends upon the audience sometimes.
For sure.
Yeah, because you can very quickly get labeled as a female around the C-suite table if you're too assertive.
Right. Right. But you have to be assertive enough
To be
because
heard.
you have to be heard. So I think it's interesting in that respect, being a woman and sometimes being at the table with all men. That's a really interesting challenge for women.
Yes.
So hopefully you won't have to face that as much as Karen and I had to face it. And I think that's another thing that women have to do. You can finally get that seat at the table. And then when you get to that seat at the table and you know you want to make some changes, you sometimes have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And you have, in order to gain respect from people, you have to earn it. And so it was helpful for me to sit there and experience. There were times that I felt shot down. There were times that I felt heard. And I think it grew me a lot professionally to be that only woman. So, and then I was glad when you came along and you came along, and now there's three of us. Now
And I think the men feel outnumbered with the three of us.
I think so.
I think what you said about being at the table is a huge concept. It's theoretically and physically, right? We're physically being asked to be around that executive table, and we're invited to be there. And I think that needs to be talked about more of like, we don't need to prove our way once we get there. We're there because we've been invited to be there.
And I would like to think we have done our part. I mean, the women before us, you look at, we were talking earlier about.
They didn't even have a right to vote.
They didn't have a right to vote. So you think about Susan B. Anthony, who we were talking about earlier, that really started this movement in a big way with, kind of like sacrificing marriage and all her life and devoted it to paving the way for women such as us to sit at the C-suite. And I'd like to think that the women who are coming after us, like I said before, that we've made it a little easier. Yeah, it should still be hard work. I don't want to be misunderstood that it's super easy, but some of the other barriers. Now we still have gaps. Pay equity.
I was going to bring up this.
Let's talk about
pay equity.
I mean, we're better than we were, and we've chipped away a little, but I think the latest statistic I read, it's still like 83 cents to the dollar that a female gets versus a male in the same job. So we still need to close that gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we definitely are working to do that. But it's very difficult. And when men make those decisions, it makes it even more difficult too. We feel like we have to prove ourselves sometimes even more so.
My personal desire for my legacy is I want to aspire to the highest level I can in this industry. I want to be known as somebody that made a difference. I want to be known as somebody who is passionate and who really understood this business and could contribute. That's important for me. I want to be seen as being successful in this business, but also I want to have a legacy of whatever my children choose to do. I want to make sure that I teach them everything that I know about being a professional. And I'm happy right now because all three of my daughters are in the furniture industry in some aspect, whether it's design or product development or merchandising. And I didn't ask them to be. It just happened naturally. So I'm really kind of proud of that legacy, and it reminds me of my dad.
There used to be this fear of HR, and we were the Grim Reapers, and that's all we did. But I don't want that legacy. So I want a legacy where, women, we've kind of knocked down some barriers. Hopefully we'll get pay equity where it should be. That's definitely a challenge. But beyond that, it's how do we grow women here? How do we help women network? How do we help women just achieve whatever level it is? It doesn't have to be CEO. It can be any level, whatever their measure of success is. I want to make sure that we've sort of paved a way to help them find that, and making sure that people are taking care of themselves through mental health and resources that we've provided them.
I feel like my grandparents really instilled in me just a culture, or really a mindset of hard work, and I don't think I definitely wouldn't be where I am today if that hadn't been instilled to me at a young age of people are going to talk good about you, people are going to talk bad about you, but you can only control what you think in between your ears about yourself, and you can control whether you show up every day and work hard. I feel blessed and honored to be able to carry out the legacy of my family and of our business, and to be able to employ all the people that we do and provide a place for people to work that's positive and inspiring and beautiful, and to be able to have people in roles where they can be creative and they can really express their creativity and their passions. I want to be somebody who surrounds people and invites them up as I'm moving up in my career.